Hey, wow, it's good to see you here. I didn't think we were going to make it. We've had some technical difficulties, but you know what? I'm glad we're here right now. Conversations with E.D. Mondaine is happening right now. And I tell you what, there's a lot to talk about. One of the things I think that's really important for us right now, especially with the atmosphere that we've lived in the last few years, where we've been in a closed climate, and we've not been able to really move about and be the fullness of what we've all been used to being. So it's made us all a little crazy, and it's kind of time to do something different. And when I say crazy, I mean crazy. I don't want to be politically correct because that's what we identify as. Not challenged, not, mentally, diseased, but just kind of crazy, scrambled. And I think that at those times we have to look at finding our inner cores. Have you ever thought about who you are and what you stand for? And I'm not talking simply about the roles that we play in life or our social status. You can be a friend, you can be an employee, a boyfriend, a husband, or a wife, a father or a son, and a daughter, and all at the same time. However, there is only one essential you that bears essence of your creative purpose. Creative purpose. All of us are creative, and we were born in that creation with a purpose in mind. This who, because it is somebody, and that somebody we're talking about is you, is the presence that is deep within you. And we have to learn how to tap into that essence, or as some would say, that superpower, to find out who we really are. To reach our inner selves is to reach and to begin to connect with your purpose. This trips our motivation. It gives us motive and it gives us life, and we begin to have to depend on or look to building our belief structures, not what you've been told by other people. You look like you'd be a good dentist, or you look like, well, what does that look like? But what you have discovered, you have to discover this in yourself. Knowing your inner self, it requires a high level of introspection, a great look in, and self-awareness. And when you reach clarity on all of what I just talked about, I wouldn't be surprised if you catapulted. Many of us feel stuck, and we need to take that long jump, okay? And we need to be catapulted to a higher place, to wake up and become what some would identify to arrive to a higher level of self-awareness. Now, we got to realize that this process, or this self-discovery, doesn't end until we die. We're going to be looking for Mr. and Mrs. Self for a long time. It's a lifelong journey. I'm very fortunate to have somebody who understands that journey very well. Tonight in our conversation, I have a wonderful host. His name is Naiam Hassan, a native Portlander and an all-around terrific guy, a 7-time, 3 bronze, 3 silver medal winners, Olympiad in the area of Taekwondo, is here with us tonight. He competed as a middleweight, finishing in a tie for the 5th in the 1988 Seoul Olympics. And he's attended Portland State University and earned a degree in business administration and marketing, which gives him the prowess to be one of Portland's most sought after and favored Photographers. Yeah, Naim is a photographer, so hit him up. And I'm glad to have him in house today. Hey, welcome, Naim. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's,
You know, you are amazing. Looking at your bio and understanding who you are, and of course, just being a good friend has led me to understand wonderful things about this man. He is not, he looks like he's probably 26 years old, but he's every bit of 74. No, no, he's 65, and I tell you what, I marvel at who he is. Trying to uncover your inner self, as we all know, it's not easy. It's a tricky process, and for one, you hold multiple identities in your life, isn't that right?
yeah, I would agree.
Each with its own set of socially defined values and expectations, and they don't always conform to who we are on the inside. You, being an elite athlete, have surely had to do some real hard work in finding that inner core. Where do we start? Where do we go?
Yeah, that's been the athletic piece has been a lifesaver. Growing up as a kid playing Little League baseball and learning how to throw from my uncles and so forth, being outside all the time in the park, discovering our abilities and having fun and releasing stress and all those kind of things that
Now,
we
you,
were.
you have five brothers. Is that correct?
No, I have, so I'm the oldest of nine,
Wow.
but I was raised by my grandparents.
Okay.
My father and mother were 15 when I was born.
Okay.
And so I grew up with my aunts and uncles. So they were my brothers and sisters growing up,
Wonderful.
right? Different than most folks, I would suspect. But nevertheless, it was an amazing, wonderful, traumatic upbringing.
I know something about that.
And it was all good. I mean, I think back to that life and the struggles of trying to figure out how I fit into the scheme of things. What drove me from a creative perspective was figuring out and learning how to deal with the discomfort that I was dealing with most of the time. So I was very creative. So I would go to my room and I would draw and paint, which I found to be a wonderful outlet. Mm-hmm. And when it was light outside, we would be out playing baseball, throwing the ball up against the stairs in front of the house, or be at the local school, learning how to catch. And as a result, I remember being at one of the schools, throwing the ball against the wall with tears rolling down my face, and I couldn't see the ball. And so I would throw. The harder I would throw, the harder it would come back to me. Mm. And what I learned over time was develop some reflexes.
Yeah.
To catch that ball, so I didn't have to run down a block to catch it. Right.
That's smart.
So
Right.
so there was some internal motivation and some skill development that was happening through this traumatic experience.
Wow.
Right. And so later, learning how to be conscious about that development, going and practicing with the intent of getting better and not getting better as a byproduct
So
of overcoming.
clicked when you were doing all that crying and you were missing the ball. Something clicked.
Something clicked. And what I found that clicked was the ability to refocus.
So what you're talking about right now is him looking at the pain that he was going through and understanding that that was a deficit, but then discovering something else in that pain that was necessary to catapult him forward. Wow. So I think that we need to probably start not just looking at the pain, but what am I doing and how can I, how can I move forward, right?
Yeah, because the pain, it changes forms, right? And part of the pain is that we are not able to identify. We feel what we feel. We call that pain. But I found that working through that and redirecting the attention away from the discomfort to something else also changes our perspective on the pain that we're experiencing.
Yes.
Because we can move from this sense of pain to a sense of pleasure by maintaining a level of focus. And that's what I found just through the athletic piece. And I later found it through other activities. But the athletics initially was the way I was able to understand how to migrate away from the discomfort and take that energy, that frustration, and direct it towards something. And over time, I noticed that my skills were improving in the things that I was doing as an artist, as an athlete, because those were two prominent things that were accessible because of resources.
Yeah, yeah.
But as I fast forward and look back at the course of my life, that energy has never left. That spirit is still there. I'm at a point where I can be conscious about making the choices.
So you
on
have
how
to be
to
conscious. So you have to look at which brings us back to the point about 4 elements that are key in finding the inner core that we're talking about tonight. You have to look at where you're going. You talked about, wait a minute, where am I going? I'm going to get this ball, and it's getting away from me, so how am I going to deal with that? So it forced us to look at where we're going, and if it was important enough to you, we had to ask ourselves, what is important right now? What is the most important thing, and what am I doing? And because I think we were talking a little bit earlier, and I raised the question, well, one of the key elements is understanding what you're doing. And then Naiam spoke to me and said, wait a minute, most people don't even know what they're doing. You know, they don't know why they're doing it, and et cetera. But talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, one of the things I come to know, there's things that I ultimately got involved in that I didn't know existed before. So someone came into my life, and I remember those individuals. Between my junior and senior year in high school, this individual, a friend of my father's, Ali Muhammad, came to my father's restaurant and said, hey, you would be good at this. And he was talking about martial arts. But I had been playing football, basketball, baseball, track and field up to that point, and I knew nothing about what he was talking about, right? And so I started taking his classes. And what I found that I enjoyed the most about those classes, that they fit with my personality, because most of the work had to be done on your own.
Yeah.
And I was accustomed to going off into my room and going to the park and doing all these things on my own. So martial arts training was like perfect. It was like the ideal way to, again, meditate before I knew what meditation was.
So as we're listening tonight, I think one of the first steps to understanding how to reach that inner core is, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I want us to stop right now and just talk about, not just talk about, you and I talking about, not Naiam and I, but us talking about, what are you doing? And what is so important about what you're doing? Why is that so important? And how are you acting? What's being gained from what you're doing? Is it catapulting you forward? I think it's safe to say that we need to have a mission statement in finding that inner core. We need to find a mission statement. I often talk to people who want to start businesses. I say, well, you have to write a business plan. You have to have some kind of a mission statement, and we have to write mission statements about ourselves that identifies what we want and what we desire to do. So in our mission, we need to understand, as we're moving forward to finding that inner core, what are we doing? One's mission and purpose are often viewed as synonymous, but there is a difference. Purpose asks and answers the question as to why. And what do I mean by why? Why? Why accomplishing the vision is worthwhile and why it is important. Our mission, when we get a hold of where we're going and what we really want to do, it begins to answer that question. You know, I've spent a great deal of time in the last 3 years talking about what is it that I really want to do and where is it that I really want to go, and I've had to focus on that. Boy, and it's been a rocky road. So I want to know what you're doing and trying to reach your desired destination. The mission statement is centered on the purpose of what you need to be doing. So what do we need to be doing? I want to hear more about Naim's story and what it was that he found out that he needed to be doing and how he had to fight to do it.
So part of my foundation, I remember 1983, I was introduced, I was out of competition for a couple of years. And I'm going back to 83 because that time period, what I'm going to share with you, laid the foundation for everything that came after and where I am today. But it was rooted in documenting. I had this book called The Presence Process, and there were a series of exercises in the book, writing clusters and writing down your goals and drawing these little diagrams, and then mentally rehearsing, self-talk. So there was a script that I wrote about winning the national championship that I read every single day for 6 months. And I had a visual of the player who I thought I was going to have to compete against. So I was competing against him every single day in my imagination, along with the visualization, along with the self-talk that I'm going to win nationals. I'm going to be a national champion. I didn't have time to second guess the process, right? I read the book and the book said, do this. And so I learned to follow directions. So I did what the coach said, basically, and didn't have enough time to second guess.
Wait a minute, you have to follow directions?
I know, what a concept, right? Excuse me. But what I discovered in that whole process, when we don't have time and we make a choice to move in a direction, it's like having your back against the wall. And I wrote an article here recently and published this. It's the power of having your back against the wall is you don't have a lot of choices.
Ooh.
And you have to make a decision and move forward because there's no backwards.
So that goes back to saying, what are you doing? And is your back against the wall? And so it's going to answer the question when you look at what you're doing to say, wait a minute, how do I get out of this situation? What do I need to do?
Yeah.
Wow.
And being clear, or maybe not so clear, other than I need to move. Because oftentimes we don't know where we're going because we don't have the awareness or the insight to know all of the details that we sometimes think we want to know. And oftentimes being on the path, moving in a direction, you begin to attract other folks who have more insight.
Yes.
They can sense what it is that you're trying to do. Maybe they can't, but they can ask questions. Or what are you trying to do? It's like, I'm not exactly sure. And you mentioned something earlier, but I found to be very helpful is there's some people in our lives that know. They're put there for a purpose.
Yeah.
And they can offer some insight based on what they see and what we do. They can say, based on what I see, you might be good at this, which was my case because there folks have said, you should go to school and major in business or you should go to this networking event because there's opportunities. And I'm like, where is that? And ultimately, one of the things I learned to do is follow through, follow up, and at least go explore. Because when I arrived at those destinations, what I experienced was I had no idea was even available. And the more I continued to show up to networking events and to training sessions.
But you had to move.
You have to move. All of these things was like peeling an onion.
So you can't stay in that space.
No.
You got to recognize what you're doing. You've got to understand what it is that you need to do to move forward, and then you've got to do it.
You got to move. You've
got to move. And then you need to build a mission. You say, I'm on a mission, so I've got to follow the directions. I got to stay on course. What a concept. Google is one of the biggest organizations in the world, and it's focused on information, and it makes information universally acceptable and useful. It knows what it does. In writing your mission statement and going to the place to what motivates you and what you got to be, it should be aspirational, like Google, focusing on the world's information. You have to focus, like Naiam had to focus on what it is that he had to do and what he had to do to accomplish it. Finally, an effective mission statement conveys the impact of your work because you're not doing it just for yourself. You're doing it for the people that are around you, and you have to have a clientele, somebody that's going to appreciate who you are, which that's a whole nother show, talking about appreciation and self-validation and all those other kinds of things. But it's got to focus on the people that you want to serve, who you want to affect, and how that effect's going to change the scope of your world. What is my mission? What did you find your mission was?
Well, it's changed. One was winning a national championship. That was a personal goal. One ultimately was just being a better person.
Yeah.
And trying to understand, what does that mean for me? Being obedient, tolerant, courteous, kind, honest, and dependable. Those are principles that I learned and I incorporate and live by.
And that's what most of us want to be.
You know, and it's work.
Yeah.
It's a conscious process of every interaction, running through that series. Am I being tolerant, courteous, kind, and dependable in these situations? And it's like most practices. It's a practice. It's something that we have to engage in intentionally, a little bit every day. And the more we do it, we get stronger at it, and it's easier over time. And when I think back to all the things that I have been blessed to do, that simple formula is the key. It's not magic. It's just like time. We get impatient. One of the things I mentioned to folks is this concept called patience. And patience to me is not about, it's about how to do it versus, they say, be patient. Well, we can't be patient until we learn how to do patience. And doing patience is about how do I restructure my thinking so that I don't get frustrated while time passes. Because that's what we call being impatient. I'm anxious. I want it to happen now, but it can't happen now because time is its own entity. But I have to learn how to manage the story in my head that tells me, oh my God, this is taking too long and I need to have something else I should be doing. And we freak ourselves out. We just increase the intensity, the discomfort in our being, and makes us, quote, impatient. What I've learned over time through this process is how to reframe that story and be intentional about writing and directing, being the director of my own play, giving myself the script that I want my characters to play and read, and making sure that the story that we're telling ourselves isn't one that's going to incite excitement and discomfort.
So all of this was birthed through looking at what you were doing, asking yourselves why you were doing it, what it is that you need to be doing, and then following up with that, continuing to stand the fight, and then having to sculpt in your mind and your heart a mission. What do I want to be? Where do I want to go? I want to beat this cat. What did it feel like when you won your first gold medal?
I had rehearsed that scene in my mind, and it was amazing being in Chicago and raising my hand and me falling to the ground in exhaustion was the exact thing that I had rehearsed every single day for 6 months. So when it happened, it was this interesting confirmation. It was the most amazing experience because I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew something happened, and I knew that I need to document this and begin to take it apart and understand what this visualization process, the self-talk, these affirmations, what all that meant. And so from that point on, it became my study. It became my PhD program to understand mentally, emotionally, physically, what happens when we tell ourselves these stories, and do they trigger a sense of anxiety and frustration or excitement, and what do we do with that?
Wow.
Because I know that when we feel that anxiety, frustration, there's uncertainty, we have a tendency to back up. But when we relieve that kind of that kind of pressure, there's a peacefulness, and we're able to move forward. And consistency comes to mind, but I have a different language or different description on how I talk about consistency, right? Because consistency to me is not about, there's no inconsistency. We hear, oh, he's too inconsistent. No, that's not accurate from my perspective. Consistency is about time. Yeah. Time is moving forward. We have two options in terms of how we invest in that time. You do what you say, or you do something else. That's it. And the outcomes based on those, how we invest in those two.
Wait a minute, say that again. Somebody needs to hear that. I need to hear that. Don't you
Consist-
need to hear that?
Consistency, two things.
Uh,
You do what you say, or you do something else.
Dude.
Time is moving,
So somebody would say, doo-doo or get off the boo-boo pot,
whatever.
right? Okay,
Exactly.
there you go.
But nevertheless, if we are investing time, which we always are, that's the misconception. Chilling out is still a thing,
Yeah.
right? But being intentional about doing something or being intentional about not doing something,
Wow.
making the choice. Because if we chill, we know if we chill too long, what that looks like. And if we're engaged in our process, it's about planting seeds. And not all the seeds are going to grow at the same rate, at the same time, and all that kind of stuff. So ideas that we have are like seeds. We plant them in our mind and our spirit. They're going to grow at their own rate.
You
Our
told me
job-
something about seed planting that was just phenomenal as we were having a conversation the other day. You talked about the cane. Talk about that. How cane grows.
Yeah, so when I travel to Costa Rica, for example, I came across this timber bamboo, right? A lot of plants, particularly this time of year, like the crocus, little flowers, they're going to burst through the surface here shortly, and that's a great sign of spring, and they show signs of success because they're early, and right? And there's a lot of folks who think that they want what they want right now.
Right.
And sometimes it's not a croaker. Maybe it's a timber bamboo, which means that when you plant those particular species, it may take several years before the root system establishes itself, before that little sprout peeks its head above the soil. And once it does that, it might grow 3 to 4 feet in a matter of a week or so.
Wow.
And up to 15 to 25 feet in a short period of time. And so I like those analogies because, again, we're talking about time, two different types of plants, but with two different characteristics.
And just moving and understanding that you got to keep moving and you got to keep understanding that something's going to happen.
Something's going to happen.
If you continue to follow that formula. Listen.
And that's, before, I don't want to cut you up, but
That's okay.
that's where I've come to really appreciate this concept we hear and called moving on faith.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because when you're moving on faith, you don't get to know
Yeah.
how it's all going to work out. Right? That's not your job.
That's right.
That's not my job to know. And I've come to realize that my job is not to know how it's all going to play out. My job
Wow.
is to do my part, which I've identified as move right now. And do a little bit every day and being conscious about that consistency and let go and let God, it's going to work out how it works out.
Man, you know what? We could go on in this conversation with Brother Naiam for much, because this is just, we're barely scratching the surface. So we've already made a decision that we're going to come back and talk about the subject in a lot more detail. But understanding as we get ready to go, looking at what's really purposeful in finding your inner core, and it's understanding where you're going and why it's important for you to get there, what you're doing, how you're going to act when you get there. He rehearsed what he was going to do at the finish line. He said, "I'm going to," and wow, and he did that 7 times. Then 3 more times for bronze and 3 more times for silver. My God. I want to leave you with some things today, and we just got a minute to do this. How will you achieve your vision? How are you going to move into your inner core? And who are you going to serve while doing that? You can't just serve yourself. Your vision has to include how to make somebody else better. You got to take somebody else for the ride. And what are you going to do for them? How are you going to encourage them to be the better man and the better person because of your experience? And why is that all important? What kind of impact will you have for the community and for the rest of the world? And how do you differentiate yourself from where you were to where you are right now? Listen, moving and finding our inner core is essential, it's prevalent, and it's something that all of us need to do. This is E.D. Mondaine. I am so happy to have been able to, my co-host today, Naiam Hassan of Hassan's Photography. Look him up. He's one of Portland's best. I love you. I'll see you next week at 6 o'clock as we have conversations with E.D. Mondaine. We'll be on time next time. God bless you all.